Everyone knows Walt Disney as the man who built the world's most iconic theme parks. But Walt also had dreams of building idealistic, self-contained communities. You're probably familiar with his most famous concept of this, his experimental prototype community of tomorrow, also known as Epcot. But that wasn't Walt's only vision for one of these communities, because before his death, he also had his sights set on building one as a ski resort, located in a remote area of a national forest. And this wasn't just a dream, it actually came incredibly close to actually happening. So this is the story of Mineral King. I'm Mouselet1, and for today's Mouselets Monday, we are doing a deep dive into an obscure Walt Disney passion project. As I said in the intro, he wanted to build a ski resort in order to expand the Disney portfolio. Because despite how things ended up progressing after Walt's death, his intention was never to stop at theme parks. Walt wanted to do more, and he wanted to create actual communities, places for people to live, places for people to visit that fit into this idealistic vision that he had. After Disneyland opened in 1955, Walt ultimately started to see it as his proving ground. He loved Disneyland and everything that it had to offer, but he also knew that he would always be constrained by its size and location. So as we all know, he set his sights on something bigger that he called the Florida Project. But what's not as well known is that Walt didn't want to stop there. He also wanted to pursue projects closer to home. And as it turns out, the 1960 Winter Olympics were scheduled to be held at Squaw Valley, which at the time was a very small ski resort located near Lake Tahoe. It literally had one chairlift, 2 tow ropes, and could hold 50 people. And the owner of the resort had only applied to the Olympics as a publicity stunt. But in 1955, after beating out tons of other far more famous mountain resorts around the world, Squaw Valley was selected as the location for the 1960 Winter Olympics. So in 5 years, an Olympic-level facility needed to be built, which was a huge task. And they decided that in order to do this, they would need to harness the help of nearby Hollywood. And of course, who was in Hollywood at the time but Walt Disney, a Hollywood powerhouse. He was asked to be chairman of the pageantry committee, which really meant that he'd be involved in ceremonies as sort of a figurehead. But it quickly became much more than that, because Walt did what Walt typically does, and he began recruiting from within the Disney company in order to take the pageantry committee to new heights. He and his team created 30 16-foot faux snow statues to line the avenue of athletes, amongst several other sculptures, and they recruited thousands of students to join in on a chorus and a band to play at the ceremonies. During the opening ceremony of the games, which went down in history as one of the best ever, they used daytime fireworks for the first time, which of course we now commonly see at Disney parks. Walt believed that the athletes should have entertainment as well, so stars like Bing Crosby and Roy Rogers made appearances. And the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences presented films each night. For one night of the games, Walt even brought in the Golden Horseshoe Revue from Disneyland to perform. And after the 1960 Winter Olympics completed, they were called the greatest games ever staged, much of which was in part to Walt's contributions. Okay, so why did I just tell you all about Walt's participation in the Olympics? Well, this was a very important project because it was a project that inspired Walt to begin surveying land throughout the United States in order to build a winter resort. To quote the 1969 Disney Annual Shareholders Report, Walt believed that, quote, "the operation of a family-oriented outdoor recreational area would be a healthy diversification in a growing market for our company." AKA, Walt wanted to open a ski resort. Now, conveniently, around the same time in the early 1960s, the U.S. Forest Service began encouraging private development of recreational areas on national land. They believed that America's growing middle class was going to be increasingly seeking outdoor activities like skiing and camping and hiking. And so, to meet that demand, they began opening bids for private corporations to come in and build winter sports sites on national land. And one of those sites was a secluded alpine valley in the Sequoia National Forest called Mineral King. Mineral King is about 7,500 feet up in the Sierra Nevada range. It sits near the Sequoia National Park and has mountains that reach over 12,000 feet, meaning that it has one of the longest annual snow periods west of the Rockies. Since the 1870s, this area had been used as a remote mining and camping spot. But it was completely untouched from a development perspective. And champion skiers who surveyed the land said that its slopes rivaled any in the world. So in 1964, as part of their initiative to build these private winter sports sites, the Forest Service announced plans to turn Mineral King into one of the nation's largest ski resorts. They invited private companies to submit development proposals, and they stressed that they were seeking someone with what they called imaginative, tasteful design, as well as the financial capability to complete such a massive project. More than 20 groups expressed interest, most of which were hotel companies, other ski resorts, or real estate developers. But one of those companies was Disney. And so ultimately, Disney entered a public bidding against 5 other corporations. And in 1965, they were selected as the winner and granted a 3-year planning permit. So how did Disney win, especially against other organizations with far more experience in this area? It really all hinged upon Walt's vision because he didn't want to just build another ski town. He wanted to build an example of that model community, a place that was family-friendly, sustainable, and accessible to all. His pitch was to create a year-round recreational facility, which would house a completely self-contained village with a chapel, ice skating rink, shops, 10 restaurants, a conference center, a ski school, a fire station, a heliport, and lodging, including 2 large hotels. Quick Disney Parks lore drop: the Country Bear Jamboree was actually originally designed as entertainment for one of the restaurants at Mineral King. The mountains would have 14 ski lifts for use both in the winter for obvious reasons and in the summer to allow sightseeing, camping, and hikers. And the true key to his proposal, and the reason that Disney was selected, was the sustainability aspect. As Disney said themselves, quote, "The company's entire approach has been based on the absolute necessity to preserve the site's natural beauty and alpine character. As part of the proposal, cars would be entirely excluded from the valley. Instead, guests would park at the entrance and be transported to and around the area by a cog railroad system." And Disney also said, quote, "Further, the area's natural character will be preserved by camouflaging ski lifts, situating the village so that it will not be seen from the valley entrance, and putting service areas in a 60,000 square foot underground facility beneath the village." And so to create all this, the plan was to invest $35 million, with an opening date of 1976 to an estimated annual 2.5 million visitors. And even as they awaited final development plans and grant approvals, Disney got to work surveying the land. In a copy of the Disney World magazine, an article reads, quote, "Studies are progressing too on Mineral King soil and its structure supporting qualities, the valley's meteorological and hydrological characteristics, type of architecture suitable for the village, the kinds and number of restaurants that might be needed, the sanitation system that would best serve the area, the utilities requirements, the problems of establishing parking areas on the hilly granite, an appropriate transportation system, the proper placement of the village, and so on. All are vital to a final writing of the master plan." Concept art was created, and Walt Disney spoke passionately about this project, highlighting it frequently as one of the next big steps that the company would be taking, all of which was part of his expansion plan. There was the Florida project, there was Mineral King, and there would be other locations as well. Before we continue this story, it's important to note that Walt Disney died in 1966, not long after Mineral King plans were officially kicking off. Some say that this stalled the project, but looking through Disney's annual shareholder reports and other documents from this time, that doesn't really seem to be the case. The Disney company as a whole really did seem to believe in this project and continue to push it forward, even despite a lot of uphill challenges, which we'll get into right now. This entire plan hinged on one key aspect: building a highway into Mineral King. There was a road that already existed, but it was small and only partially paved, meaning that it was only usable when there wasn't snow, which was not going to be ideal for a massive ski resort. Over the years, turning this road into a highway had actually come up multiple times. And in 1965, as the Forest Service was beginning this initiative, the state legislature transferred the existing county road into the state highway system, preparing for it to be turned into an official highway. So Disney, of course, won the bid, and as they prepared to begin work, the California governor announced that they would be granting a $3 million federal grant to go towards the $25 million project, which also included power lines, a sewer system, and expanded parking areas to accommodate the tens of thousands of guests that Disney was anticipating. But this highway was going to cut through part of the Sequoia National Forest, and environmental groups, particularly an organization called the Sierra Club, began to vocally oppose the project over concerns that it would cause irreversible damage to the alpine ecosystem, disturbing wildlife, increasing erosion, and opening the door to overdevelopment in what always had been protected wilderness. But politicians in the area rallied behind Disney, and an LA Times editorial from the time reads, quote, "Disregarding the millions who might be able to enjoy an accessible Mineral King, the Sierra Club demanded that the valley be kept in a pristine state. Such a belated proposal should be rejected promptly by the appropriate federal agencies. Approval would be an act of bad faith towards a successful bidder. Far more important, it would be breaking faith with the public, for whom the land is held in trust for the best possible use." But despite government support and continued progress, like the California Highway Commission adopting a 7-year financing program for the road and approving the California Highway Engineers route, the project wasn't able to begin construction due to delays in getting final approvals. And then in 1969, the Sierra Club, which to be clear was a prominent environmentalist organization, formally opened a lawsuit against the United States Secretary of the Interior to block the development of the ski resort. They argued that building it would cause irreparable harm to public interest, and after 2 days of hearings, the judge issued a preliminary injunction blocking the creation of the resort until the court case was resolved. But this was a very unique case because while it was Disney's plan that was really at the center of it, Disney was not involved. Because while this case focused on Mineral King, it actually was part of a larger initiative. The Sierra Club was using it as a way to challenge the U.S. Forest Service overall management of national lands. But it meant that Disney wasn't able to begin development until the court case was resolved, which could take years. And it did take years. In fact, in 1972, the courts actually ultimately ruled against the Sierra Club. They said that the Sierra Club didn't have the right to sue because they would not be personally harmed by the project. Again, the Sierra Club really had nothing to do with this other than they felt passionately about the use of the land. But then the Sierra Club amended its legal filing, adjusting it to include members who'd actually visited Mineral King and therefore would technically be personally harmed, which began yet another legal battle. During this time, we can see in the Disney annual shareholder reports that they basically put the project on pause. Once this got embroiled in a legal battle that had nothing to do with them, Disney had nothing to do but wait. It didn't make sense to invest more money until they figured out what was going to happen, but it didn't make sense to necessarily cancel the project yet either. So everything was pretty much on pause. But once the Sierra Club refiled, it pretty much seemed like that was going to be the end. In October 1973, the Los Angeles Times published a piece entitled, "Planned Mineral King Resort Appears Doomed," as it appeared that the case was going to be tied up for years and years. And during that time, new environmental laws had come up that was going to make the project more complicated, and political and financial backing had just fallen through. Mineral King isn't mentioned in Disney annual shareholder reports beyond 1971, and as the court case dragged on, Disney ultimately decided that they were no longer interested. By 1978, Mineral King was officially added to the Sequoia National Park, and over the years has become permanently protected from development. So Disney's ski resort was never built, but neither was anyone else's. I did another video on a park called Disney's America, which was also a never-built Disney project that was canceled due to public backlash. And to me, this project is very similar in a lot of ways, particularly because after the original location fell apart, in Disney's America, they tried to find a new location. And the same thing happened here. This is why I say that this project didn't really die with Walt, because the Disney company was still interested in pursuing it elsewhere. They began scouting a private location at Independence Lake, which was north of Lake Tahoe. And in 1974, they actually began to purchase parcels of land. But their land was within plots of federal land, which meant that they didn't have one single area for continuous development. And so they proposed a swap with the National Forest Service, where they would basically swap pieces of their land with the national land in order to create one large area. That would have given them access points along the lake, to the highway, and the ability to make sure that they were implementing the best possible design. They argued that the project could generate tax revenue and create local jobs, as well as improve land management in the area. But again, this was 1974, and the Forest Service decided that in order to consider the swap proposal, they first needed to do a land use study, which they said wouldn't be done until at least 1976. And they claimed to be unable to make any decisions about Disney's project until that was done. So without knowing if they could use the nearby land, Disney decided to not invest any more resources into that project. And as the years progressed, that project also fell apart. The Forest Service continued to push back the land swap proposal and began to ask Disney to obtain more and more approvals. By the end, they were going to need to go through 9 different state agencies in addition to the federal reviews that they needed. And of course, environmental organizations began to pop up as well, voicing concerns about the impacts of the infrastructure on wildlife. So after spending more than $2 million on the land and on planning, Disney formally withdrew its application and abandoned the project in 1978. And so we never got a Disney ski resort, and we probably never will. But this is yet another project that shows that Walt had much bigger plans beyond theme parks. And sadly, his early death is what prevented us from seeing many or most of those from ever coming to fruition. If you love Disney history, secrets, facts, and lore, check out our channel because we have deep dives releasing every single Monday. And we also have our podcast, Sister Sisters, which comes out on Thursday for some lighter Disney chit chat. For now, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. Bye!